Yeah, that's great. Um, could you I think there's a little bit of an echo in my sound, so if you could mute and then when you want to speak, you can speak anytime and stop me at any slide.
I
But
got you. Yeah.
um, I can just talk and there won't be a echo coming back from me.
Yes, I am not too up on these things here, but
Okay, let me go to present mode. Can you see my screen?
yes, I can.
Okay,
You have finance, Islamic finance with gold dinar.
okay. So um, this is not really Islamic finance with gold dinar. I actually changed the name. I should rename this to um, just an introductory discussion. So what I want to talk today is basically discuss the dynamics of the gold dinar movement that I have experienced so far. And then we're going to talk about a number of other topics. I actually wrote out a much detailed and a bigger agenda, but when I was writing out my slides, I didn't really follow that. So I just said, this is what we're going to talk about. You know me. I
Okay.
have been a gold dinar activist for a number of years. I worked with other people in the UK and South Africa, Malaysia. We introduced the Malcolm X dinar, the dirham, and the gold dinar in the United States. I've authored a book in Urdu. I'm also a student of the traditional Islamic courses that people typically do in a completely separate religious educational track. So, excuse me, that is still quite in its infancy, but I think when we go out and talk to people who have been trained in the traditional education, then you have to be able to level set with them and speak in their language. So I thought it's going to be very useful to delve a little bit into the traditional Islamic education there's in Nizami. Otherwise, I studied from Texas State as a software engineer. There's a book that I've written in Urdu, Gold Dinar. It is quite comprehensive, but a little dated now. So I may come out with a English version or something. So let me start with um, the basic fundamental problem, in my view, that the Gold Dinar movement seeks to address or should be addressing, and that is basically the issue of financial justice. So capitalism, in the way that it is practiced in the West right now, it has definitely demonstrated its efficacy as an engine of collective growth better than other economic experiments like communism. But the problem which it still has is that it is not delivering financial justice to its own people. So in 2020, we have 1% people in America who own 40% of the wealth in America. And there are like three individuals in America who own more wealth than 50% of the rest of Americans, which is 164 million people. So there's definitely something wrong with the system the way it is implemented right now. However, I would not like throw the baby out with the bathwater and say capitalism is the problem, because capitalism itself is probably a good thing if you just fix the problem that it has. Now, this goal, this financial justice goal, is very interestingly uh, directly and specifically mentioned in the Quran also. So there is a verse that says, so that wealth may not merely circulate among your rich. Verse 7 of Surah 59. So this is a little bit different from the verses in the Quran that relate to the prohibition of riba itself. And The way I see it is that the prohibition of riba allows us to attain this bigger goal, which is to circulate, to not to the restrict the wealth among a small group of people. So if capitalism is good and there's still financial inequality, what are the problems? What are the causes of that? There are a number of different factors. Some of the factors are uh, it is debatable how much each of the factor contributes, but in my view, I think the smaller factor is historically inherited inequality of class and ethnicity that perpetuates, like a poor person remains poor because he did not inherit the means to grow his wealth. Then capitalism also exaggerates the differences in people's location, physical access, ability, environment, all the other things. But the major factor is capitalism as money can earn guaranteed interest. So that's the prohibition of usury, which has existed in Hinduism, in Judaism, in Christianity, in Islam. All major philosophers, I think Aristotle also disliked it. So every major thinker has traditionally known and understood that usury is bad for the economy, and that's the primary factor today in capitalism, which is generating that income disparity or wealth disparity.
A question, brother. So in the Hindu religion, they also prohibit riba. They acknowledge this too, that it's an injustice.
So I think
Ah,
from the perspective of canon law, it's very loosely specified, but there are specific texts in their religious books that dislike or they call users as bad, or it is like frowned upon in general. So I don't know if it is legally prohibited or not, but it is disliked.
it's just like I know in the Jewish religion it's just like, but the books are been changed around to say long as they're Gentiles, you can do this to them, but they
Yes,
don't do it amongst
they
themselves.
don't do it amongst
Yeah,
themselves. That is true.
yeah, yeah.
Which still
Okay.
sufficiently establishes that they don't like it enough that they don't do it among themselves. So the the negativity is still there associated with it. The second aspect besides interest is capital as property can earn profit, but along with earning profit and along with earning interest, capitalism also can be used as collateral to obtain more capital. So this is quite different from the traditional economic impact of interest alone. Previously, in the way world economy has been running before these last 100 years, the only primary factor was interest, because the financial overlords had not yet devised the mechanisms that they have today to be able to multiply their wealth the way that they do today. So aside from the basic effect of interest, there is also another effect that has more recently been introduced, which is your ability to grow capital and multiply it. And so, if you're taking interest, you're not taking interest on your original capital, but you're taking it in an inflated 5 times version of it. And that exaggerates the whole impact even more. Now, the problem is while capital can be used as collateral to obtain loans, labor cannot be used as collateral to obtain a loan. You cannot go to a bank and say, I'm going to work for the next year, so please give me a loan. But if you have money, you can go to a bank and say, this is the down payment, or this is my house, it's a collateral, please give me a loan. So that also contributes a lot in artificially or synthetically putting the capitalist at a great advantage over the other partner who is just providing skill or labor or something else. Now, in our Gold Dinar movement, there is a very interesting writer, Abdul Samad Clark. He's in UK, Norwich. He has given a very beautiful definition of this this thing called usury capitalism. So we don't want to say capitalism per se is bad because with the success of the Western economies and with the downfall of communism, it is very widely and generally believed that capitalism is good. So we have to distinguish what exactly is bad within it. And so we try to give it a new name, which is usury capitalism. And he has come up with this very interesting, uh, I think, very comprehensive definition of it. Usury capitalism is the use of capital that is both generated by usury and operated according to usurious principles, which permits a tiny clique of individuals and families by the principles of fiat money amplified by leverage to wield extraordinary power and accumulate unheard of wealth in such a manner as to subject the rest of humanity as menial servants in their project of self enrichment, whether in the tyrannies of the East or the so called free market capitalism of the West. So, this is a very interesting, I really liked this piece of text that he has used to define this whole problem. So I just asked his permission to include that in my presentation. So
Yeah, that is real defined. What he's saying usually is,
yeah, yeah,
but it still goes back to how did you get in that position to be the few individuals that came from
right,
oppression, right? Yeah.
of course, and that has a whole alternative history of how the banking system developed and what were the families that owned it. Of course, yeah, that is a very interesting subject of
Yeah.
research on its own right now. So now that we
Yeah.
are there,
Okay.
what are the solutions to this wealth disparity? Traditional solutions increase. Could you mute yourself again? Sorry. Increased taxation, progressive taxation. This is the kind of solutions that maybe like Bernie Sanders style of socialism inspired people try to suggest, like you should tax the wealthy, and the more
Yeah.
radical ones say that we can depart from capitalism and go to other economic models. So the Islamic solution is to prohibit capital from earning interest and
Uh-huh.
from prohibiting capital from keeping to multiply itself without doing anything. The second thing is, if you do this, then capital now must rely on labor's partnership to earn profit because you've cut off its own multiplication and you've cut off its own ability to take interest. So now there has to be a more equitable partnership agreement between the owner of the wealth and the person of labor and skill. So that is basically the Islamic finance's traditional solution, profit and loss sharing models, which are basically just two. There's a contract of musharaka and the contract of mudaraba. Those, um, could you mute yourself? I'm still getting that echo.
Yeah.
So traditionally, um, Islamic banking has a number of different, you can say, contract types that they use to provide finance to people. But the ones that are the most prestigious and the most non-controversial and that are like the official approved ways of providing finance is Musharaka and Mudarba, which are profit and loss sharing investment models. So if we start using that instead of interest, then that basically stops the exploitation that capitalism allows to its owner. Now,
So
go ahead.
sorry. Mhm.
What are you saying there?
Okay. No, I really wanted to kind of work that in my
Okay, I think you're on mute. Okay. So to make that more, um, you can say empirical, to like demonstrate it by an example, I put down a very simple example of how the mechanism actually operates for people who are not familiar with how the whole thing works. So in a traditional model where we have like maybe an Islamic system which somebody owns like $50,000 in capital, then they can start a business and they can build like a hair salon. They rent it out to a hairdresser. The hairdresser makes $1,000 profit, and then he pays $400 in rental money to the owner of the salon.
I'm
So
studying.
in this model, um, after many years, if I've done this investment, I still own only the $50,000 property that I initially purchased. Although every month I've been getting a $400 profit, but after a number of years, even I still just own the $50,000 property that I initially had. Other owners of single shops like me have similar earnings during this time. So this is a regular example. Now, what is the multiplication effect of the capital, the whole thing that we are pointing that leads to the income disparity? If you have an interest-based system, which we have right now, I can use the same $50,000 and make that as a collateral, as a down payment to borrow a $250,000 loan from the bank. Now I've multiplied my money 5 times. Instead of buying one hair salon, now I buy 5 hair salons. And I rent all of them to 5 different hairdressers. In the same manner, each one of them makes $1,000 profit, and they pay me $400, so I make $2,000 in rental profit. The loan that I took, maybe it has a payment with interest that I need to make on my loan, so I pay them $1,500. I still get like $500 every month, which is kind of like more than what I was kind of similar to what I was previously earning. But the difference is now, after a number of years, in the first example, I still had only a $50,000 property, but now I have a $250,000 property because I multiplied my money and I am paying off the whole set of that property that I purchased. And then along the way, not only me, but my money lender also, he earns $160,000 profit and interest. So in the first example, all of that profit, all of that money would have gone to people who own the shops, and there were different people who own the shops because no single person has $250,000 money available. And the rest of the money would have gone to maybe the hairdresser or to the salon owner. But in this case, two extra people are making money. One is the lender who's making a lot of money, and the second is the investor who has multiplied his investment and now he's building his empire, like he's building his ownership on a 5 different salon properties that he previously could not have afforded. So that kind of practically demonstrates the way in which your interest-based loans are enabling some people an unfair advantage to accumulate a lot more wealth than they could have in a non-interest economy. But the main thing here is that the actual output of the economy, the 5 hairdressers working in 5 salons, that has not changed. So the people who are doing the actual work and who are generating output for the economy, they are the same. It is just that through this mechanism now the distribution is changing because your loan has leveraged you and given you more ownership than you could have otherwise afforded. Um, could you mute? I still get a small echo in my voice. The oh, actually, can I do that? Oh, you want? All right. The so now analysis of this example. In an interest what are the sources of inequality now in the interest? There's the direct interest, which gives you a guaranteed profit, even if the salon hairdresser would have gotten ill and not been able to work, the the money lender is still getting his money back. And then there's the leverage. Now, this leverage has two aspects to it. In this example, where I use my $50,000 to get hold of $250,000, the source of this money, the extra $200,000 that I got, the source of this money comes from two places. The first one is, let's see, where am I going? The first one is the fractional reserve banking, the way in which the banks create the money. And the second is currency issuance by the government, the way in which the government issues money. So there is a myth which exists in people that in a banking system, the $200,000 loan that is being given to me is actually the deposits that the rest of the people have in the bank. And so it is other people's money that the bank is using to give me a loan. But that actually is not true because the mechanism is such that that $200,000 is just virtually created and it doesn't really exist or did not previously exist. So that is, in my opinion, the primary source of the inequality where you didn't have to work to raise that capital, you just got that capital by just how the mechanism works, how the system works. Now, there are also some non-interest based sources of the inequality. There is taxation laws that favor corporations. There is the lobbying and legislation and other um, facilities available to corporations like limited liability and all of that stuff. But their contribution, it's debatable how much the actual contribution of these other things are. But I think the primary one is still interest. And both of these systems, both of these mechanisms, the interest-based mechanism and other laws like limited liability and taxation, um, they, if you go according to the classical Islamic principles of um, not only the fiqh rulings that apply on the people but also on the government. So Islam would also prohibit a government from treating some of its um, people different from others. For example, it may not be possible or permitted for a Muslim ruler to differentiate between what set of laws applies to one set of people and what set of laws applies to another set of people. So,
Yeah,
for example, in Islam,
yeah.
if we have zakat, Islam does not distinguish between this percentage of zakat applies to you if you are in this income bracket and this percent applies to you in another income bracket. But that is traditionally a source of Islamic law that has not really been um,
Implement.
researched or um, it's not taught in seminaries and it's not really um, nobody has really done justice to that aspect of the system of the Islamic rulings that apply to how governments work. Probably because much of the Islamic fiqh developed in times when the governments in Muslim world also were quite despotic. For example, the Umayyads and all that. So that is again a whole different concept um, chapter of discussion. So based on this, what has been the Muslim world's response? There are two different responses. There is a contemporary response of the Muslim world, which is um, you use Islamic banking and the way that in which Islamic banking currently works, and then you expect that at least the impact of the direct usury, which is not the leverage or the money multiplication, but just the interest income that is going to the capitalist, you expect Islamic banking to sort of alleviate that because now you are doing partnerships and you're doing banking the right way. Now, this is a flawed practice of Islamic banks because they're a very large percentage of their actual contracts comprise of non-profit and loss sharing models, and they mimic usury just like the Christian triple contract used to do. So it is just an excuse to, um, is just you can say a deviation, a mechanism to contractually avoid usury but practically still be involved with it. It provides no financial benefit to the people. In fact, it has a negative impact because people who are very good natured, they want to avoid interest, and so they choose to go to the Islamic bank. But in a lot of situations, Islamic banks charge them more compared to a conventional bank. So if you were to like buy a home, your guidance or Lardaba or some other banks, Islamic banks, even in Muslim countries, their rates and their equivalent interest rates are much higher than the non-Islamic equivalents. And then the contemporary response is completely silent on the currency and the leverage issue, either because they realize they are helpless and not able to do anything. For example, that is evident in some of the books and by the pioneers and like very famous Islamic scholar in Pakistan, Justice Taqi Usmani. He is admitted in some of the prefaces of his books that we have not yet Islamized the central banking aspect. We are just working on the commercial bank. So they're either helpless, so they know and they know that they can't do anything about it. And then for the much larger community, they are plain ignorant, like they don't even know that this is a problem. So the Gold Dinar movement has our response is basically to replace the sham Islamic banks with some real Islamic institutions. The Gold Dinar movement has cognizance of the currency and leverage issues and propose adoption of Gold Dinar, which is basically sound money. This has a lot of similarity to some of non uh, Muslim initiatives like the Austrian School of Economics and Dr. Ron Paul's efforts to audit the Fed and back the dollar with gold again. Then there are other mega issues besides the currency issue, which is like governance and trade laws. Sheikh Omar Badilio has recently done a lot of research and advocacy on open markets and other other Islamic adoption of other Islamic principles and institutions that address problems different from the currency problem. So all three of these things, they are like the subject and the goal of the gold dinar movement. So what is the impact of this fiat currency regime on a common person? The fundamental thing is that as the government's money supply increases in the two ways that we discussed above, there's the fractional reserve banking based increase in the money supply, and there is the currency issuance by the government or the state bank, the central bank. These two mechanisms, the way that they increase the money supply, that causes inflation and that devalues your assets unless you are also involved in the system and generating interest on your assets. But otherwise, your regular assets are going to depreciate. And then the other disadvantage is that you have to compete with leveraged capital. So you have to compete with other businesses because competing businesses are relying on leveraged capital, and you cannot compete with them without similarly positioning yourself. So if there's a competition to you and they have access to interest based loan and they can grow their business, they can out market you, out advertise you, increase the scale of their business, and you would not have that opportunity because you don't want to partake in the interest based loan that is available to him, but you don't want to take part in that. So the second problem is your own assets are getting devalued over time. The second thing is you cannot compete with other businesses that are in the market. And the third is maybe you cannot compete with yourself, which basically what I mean to say is that the path of raising capital on a partnership basis is administratively much more difficult than the easier path of a bank loan. So governments have lots of incentives and lots of programs.
That's
If
so
you
true. Yeah,
develop the alternative, you cannot really compete with them.
that's so true. Getting people to put their monies together. That's
Yeah,
one of the major problems too. Yeah.
that's very difficult. So there are three different types of solutions that the Golden Hour movement is trying to achieve here. The first, not just the Golden Hour movement, but there are only three different solutions perhaps that come to my mind. The first one is political activism. You employ political means and social campaigns to bring about change in the monetary system and policy. The second is educational initiatives. You educate the populace and leadership, so they include demands for monetary system change in their regular agendas in their. And the third one is you develop practical alternatives. You develop an alternative mini complementary currency ecosystem using the gold dinar. So I'll just briefly talk about each one of these. So if we look at the political activism, most of the initiatives in this category have failed or been blocked. So for example, in America, the Ron Paul revolution, it was very popular among like libertarians and young people, but it didn't really actually get anywhere. Um, the Muslim world, gold dinar followers, they have tried to approach a number of Muslim leaders in Turkey, in Egypt, in Indonesia, Malaysia. Mahathir Mohamad once attempted to revive the gold dinar in some form. The Sultan of Kelantan, they issued a gold dinar. Sheikh Omar was very active in that initiative. There is a rumor, actually not a rumor, it was eventually confirmed, that Gaddafi, the Colonel Gaddafi of Libya, he was also planning to bring about some kind of a gold-based currency in Libya. And they say that that was one of the factors that contributed to his removal eventually. So wherever this is tried politically, it has not really succeeded. The second problem with the Muslim world is there's this certain fatalism that some dinar, gold dinar followers believe that the eventual Muslim renaissance will bring about the dinar reform as part and parcel of a larger general reformation that is going to happen. They believe that uh, some leadership in the Muslim world will emerge, or maybe the Mahdi will come, or something will happen, and we don't really have to do anything. We just have to wait for that to happen. So there's this fatalistic kind of belief there. The third is basically a lack of awareness. So there are very staunch, uh, pious Muslim people who are politically strong and active, but they just simply don't have the awareness of this issue to include that in their regular political agendas. So you have religious parties that lobby for more symbolic religious issues rather than a technically complex position on economic reform around the gold dinar. So um, people would um, get activated and make demands on the government to do very um, I would say symbolic things. Maybe they are important to some people, and maybe it's a philosophical debate on how important something is in the eyes of religion. But to me, they have a general lack of awareness of the currency issue and its social impact to really ask for it in their agendas. The second thing is we can do is educational initiatives. So Sheikh Abdul Qadir Sufi and Sheikh Omar have done remarkable work in generating awareness. The fact that I myself know about this is because of Sheikh Abdul Qadir and Sheikh Imran Hussain. So they were the ones that have pioneered the awareness in their speeches and their writings. Educational awareness alone seldom result in practical solutions. So that's my own view. But still, it is fundamentally important. It should continue. The fact that we are talking here right now, the fact that I started trying to put together a course on Islamic finance, that is also like an educational initiative. So that's what we're doing here. It is very important, in my view, to the development of an academic literature. We need to win over the existing uh, religious academic leadership like the Islamic bankers and the Sharia advisors and people who form the opinion in terms of what kind of ijtihad we can do in the fiqh to enable to accommodate modern economic thought. So those are the people that we need to reach out to and educate them. So enable incorporation of gold dinar into traditional Islamic banking. If we can win these people over and we can convince them that the direction that they are following for the traditional Islamic banking, they need to shift that direction and incorporate the gold dinar. That can provide great leverage to the movement by using their financial and intellectual capital, because they are already running a very large and very vast and complex Islamic financial institutions that are just following the wrong direction. So if we can just cause them to turn direction, that'll be great. But that required a lot of education, awareness, and work on those people. So that is something that we need to develop, the literature and the awareness among these people. Now, coming to the third initiative, which is basically to develop some practical alternative that has also been active in the movement. The goal of such a complementary currency ecosystem based on the gold dinar could be to achieve some smaller level of relief for the common man. We tried that in the United States. You guys are trying that in New Jersey. Ismail Bryant is trying that in North Carolina. There have been much more wide scale local initiatives in Malaysia and Indonesia. The minting of the coins there and the acceptance of the coins in the markets and shops, and people generally buying and selling in them, not so much trading, but at least investing in them, and just by their existence and their visibility, the awareness that it creates. A lot of that has been happening in the Far East countries. Even in South Africa and other Muslim minority countries, United Kingdom, Germany, a lot of places where educated, converted Muslims live, they've tried to adopt that. So that's been very encouraging and inspiring, but not practically meaningful in terms of its financial impact. So if we do implement a practical currency system in the gold dinar, what can be the benefits of that? So in my view, there are going to be three major benefits of that. First of all, if you have a if you can demonstrate the practical viability of the theoretical thing that we are talking about, then it increases the persuasive value of its educational and awareness campaign. So while we are teaching people about the dinar, if we actually show them the dinar working somewhere in some local community, that will greatly enhance the validity of what is being taught. So that is going to be very useful. Second thing is, it can alleviate the financial position of the common man in a more immediate and meaningful manner, which is ultimately the goal of all other political and educational initiatives. So that ultimately is the goal of Islam, right? The Prophet ﷺ and his companions had to undergo a lot of hardship, and uh, a number of battles and wars were brought upon them, and people died, and it was a complete social and political upheaval in the Middle East during that time. But then, when all of that settled, ultimately it led to uh, prosperity for a large number of people that would never have been attained if that initial period of hardship had never happened. So, the goal of that hardship is not the end in itself, although from a spiritual, maybe a reward in the next world perspective, that is a goal. Like you've worked, you've done something for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and He's going to reward you. But the ultimate goal is you bring some benefit to the people because of your struggle. And this mega level of gold dinar implementation is so distant and so far off that maybe if we focus on what we can do for the common man immediately, that is going to be very useful. Not very useful, but at least in some way useful for the communities that seek to adopt that. So that could be a benefit of a practical initiative, even if it is not at a scale where it can go national or bring about the whole systemic change. So I'm going to shut down this meeting because I've got my 50 minutes up, and there's another link that I sent out. Do you have that? Then we can just join back on that link.
So go to the other link now.
Yes. Yes.
Okay. All right. That was very that was beautiful. That was good.
Thank you.
It was very meaningful. Okay, let me go to the next link now.
Alrighty, sure.
Mhm.
Okay, stop